So hi, everyone. I'm Jenny, and I'm a business development manager working with lifestyle apps here in EMEA. So working with subscriptions businesses, I get to see firsthand how developers really try that balancing act to create two complementary but compelling experiences for both free and paying users. Developers need to provide value to users before the paywall so that those users don't immediately abandon the app, but also at the same time, build a really strong product with features that people are willing to pay money for. So this balancing act is a big challenge. And so in today's panel, we have 4 companies, Peak, Dropbox, Blinkist, and the New York Times, who are all going to share how their companies have been trying to get this balancing act right in order to monetize their apps. So kicking off the panel today is Alexis from Peak, and he will firstly discuss how they went about evolving their business model to drive revenue from both ads and subscriptions. There you go.
Thank you. Hello, hi everyone. I'm Alexis, and I'm the head of monetization at Peak. Some context around Peak that will be useful first for what's coming next. So Peak is a company with a mission to improve people's health through digital products, and we have 2 main apps. The first app is Peak Brain Training, that we're gonna talk about some A/B tests later on that we've run that are relevant to the topic. Peak Brain Training is an app that helps people exercise their cognitive abilities through daily workouts. In the same way that you're going to the gym, you exercise your cognitive abilities with Peak. We have games that are developed with in-house neuroscientists or with external neuroscientists from New York University, Cambridge University, etc. We also have another app, which is Rise, a meditation app with a focus on sleep, also that was developed in conjunction with world-renowned meditation experts. The first A/B test that I want to talk to you about is actually around ads. But first, I want to give you a little bit of context around it and why it's relevant to this topic. So if you're an app like Peak and your business model is around subscriptions or in-app purchases, then chances are that more than 95% of your installers will never kind of turn or convert to become paid users. That's a massive number of users. And historically at Peak, we've never really thought about converting these users or monetizing through them. And so we started asking ourselves the question, is there a way to actually monetize from these users without breaking our freemium experience? And so we run an A/B test, and in addition to basically the historically 4 daily games that you can play for free completely at Peak, we thought that we could add 2 extra games that people could play for free by watching rewarded videos first. And if you're not very familiar with the topic, basically rewarded videos are video ads that last for about 30 seconds and that you cannot skip. And so as you can see, this experience is additive. It doesn't destroy the existing experience. It adds more free content to the users if they are willing to. It's voluntary as well. And so when we run this A/B test, we decided to spice it up a little bit. We run multiple variants through multiple kind of iterations, and we introduced this feature at day 1, day 7, day 4, day 14, or later on. And the reason why we designed this A/B test this way is because there are 2 forces at play. And we had a couple of hypotheses that were actually confirmed during the A/B test. So when we introduced this ability to play more free content, to have access to more free content early on, what we noticed is that basically our conversion was dropped quite significantly. So at day 1 or day 4, basically we saw a bigger drop in conversion that the amount of revenue that or the increase in retention that we saw basically from introducing free content early. But in the same way, we introduced basically this feature day 14 or day 30. We saw that there was a lost opportunity because we could have introduced it a little bit earlier. And so the optimal point that we found was actually somewhere between day 4 and day 8. So in our case, it was day 8 because we haven't run A/B tests between day 4 and day 8. And so this is very interesting, like I said, because probably the reason why that is happening. So when you look at our cumulative conversion graph, and I'm sure a lot of you will share a similar kind of trend, is that starting from basically the conversion is very steep in the early days, right? When a user just joins the app, the conversion is very steep. But then starting from day 4, that conversion curve starts flattening. And starting from day 8 onwards, that curve is really much flatter than in the earlier days. So that's why we believe that is the optimal point. Obviously, if you had a model that could predict when if a user will become a paid user or not, that would be ideal, and you can serve it much earlier or much later. But until that point, until we all have that model, we're going with a simpler solution. And so we did similarly. We're on other A/B tests, this time with interstitials as well, where with slightly different dynamics, where interstitials are ads that last only for 5 seconds, or that could be closed right away. And the result of all of that is that our so-called free users started representing more than 20% of our revenue, whereas just about 18 months before, they represented basically 0% of our revenue. So that's quite a nice progress that we saw there. And the second A/B test that we would like to share, this is an interesting graph. So to give you a little bit of context around it, and I'll try to explain what was in the graph as well. So the interesting part, so this is around subscriptions mostly, and what we wanted to do here is we wanted to see whether we could kind of change the balance in our free experience with our paid experience. Because historically, we've been giving 4 free games in our daily workout. And what we noticed, as we just talked about in our previous A/B test, is that every single time when we tried to offer free content, something interesting happened. We saw a drop in conversion. And that goes kind of against conventional wisdom, where if you offer more free content, you improve engagement, and because you improve engagement, retention increases, and then monetization kind of follows. But in this case, this didn't really happen. And we thought that for once, we are going to go the other way around. We are going to try to give less free content and see what could happen. And so instead of giving 4 free games, we gave 3 games and 2 games. And the result was not so surprising. So what we saw is that the 2 games only variant gave the best result. So we saw a massive increase in conversion. We did see a drop in retention, actually double-digit drop in retention. We saw also a drop in our ratings, and luckily we were able to address that by upping our game in other areas of the app, performance, crashes, etc. But the cumulative impact on our install LTV, that, as you know, takes into consideration all of these factors, basically retention, conversion, plan split, etc., increased by 45%. So it was a massive increase in our install LTV. And you can also imagine that the impact that it would have on your user acquisition. So we also, because we had a higher LTV, were able also to increase our number of installs. So the total impact of this feature was actually much bigger than just the 45% that we're talking about here. So that was really interesting. That was for Peak. The other app that I introduced earlier, which is Arise, a meditation app, we run a bit of similar A/B test, but we had different results this time. We tried giving more guides for free instead of less guides. So we would give basically users a listen to a guide before they go to sleep, and we had only 4 guides that are available. This time around, we upped it to 8 guides. And this time, we saw a double-digit increase in conversion of 12%. So this is really interesting. And I guess the takeaway is that every app and every genre has its own kind of balance between the free and paid experience. And that balance kind of lays in a different place for all your apps. So you want to try and you want to experiment as much as you can around this, especially that you can see that these small changes, really, so going from 4 guides to 8 guides or going from 4 games to 2 games, have such a kind of outsized impact on your apps and on your KPIs and metrics. So you definitely want to try and experiment things around it, because it could have a massive impact.
I think
on
this
your
leads us nicely on to Joey's example as well, which he's going to show in a moment, where actually he took content that was previously freely available and then started to restrict it. So as you can see from this example, for the first test, actually giving less for free led to lower conversion, but giving more for free for Rise led to higher conversion. So let's hear from Joey about how that worked for him.
Hey everyone, my name is Joey, and I'm a product manager at Dropbox for the iOS and Android apps. We had a pretty interesting project recently where, just as you mentioned, we sort of changed our paywall and what we gave away for free. So backing up a little, when we talk to our users about what they find valuable about Dropbox, two themes come up again and again. The first one is they're able to back up their files in the cloud so it's safe and secure. The second one is being able to have their content synced and accessible across all their devices. So that's what people love about Dropbox. When we look at our premium plans and what people pay for, it doesn't actually map quite well to this. So when you buy Dropbox Plus, you get 2 terabytes over the 2 gigs we give away for free. But there's actually no difference in the number of devices you get access to your content on. So the hypothesis we had was that we were not efficient in monetizing this value. People were, even in the free plan, using their content across multiple devices. So we started wondering, what might it look like if we started restricting the number of devices you can actually have for free in our basic plan? And the conflict here is quite clear. In our whole company's history, we've been giving away free devices all across all these, access to all these devices. Now we're thinking about taking that away. And if we do that, we're going to churn and alienate perfectly happy and engaged users. So we approached it with a few principles. The first one was that in our free experience, we would continue to give away enough value so that people would understand the magic moment of Dropbox when they have their files on one device and they open up the computer, it's all still there. So we wanted to commit to that. The second one was honoring existing users' experiences. If you had 10 devices synced up, we'd still continue to give you those devices with your Dropbox. And the third one was giving users an option to continue to complete their workflows, even if they've exceeded their device limits. So we tested in a test market an experience where as soon as a user tried to add a device that was beyond 3, we would actually hit them with this paywall and ask them, hey, if you want to use Dropbox on more than 3 devices, can you please upgrade to Plus? But don't worry, if you don't want to pay for Plus, here's an experience where you can choose the devices up to 3 that you wanted to keep your Dropbox on and continue to complete the job that you came to Dropbox to complete. And when we did this, we saw a net increase in the number of users starting trials and then end up paying for Dropbox. But when we looked at retention, we found that there was no change in the number of active days in the month following this experience. So the big takeaway for us was that if you approach these problems with principles on what is important for this experience and still building trust with users that will allow them to continue to get value and get their work done on Dropbox, it's a win-win for both parties.
And I think one thing to call out here as well, by restricting the number of devices, you did start to see an increase in negative App Store reviews. So do you feel like that trade-off was worth it in the end, or are you still waiting to see the long-term impact of that?
Yeah, we're going to continue to look at the long-term impact of that. When we looked at the retention over the month so far, we found that it's been pretty flat. So we've been happy with that. As part of the rollout, working closely with comms and our support to address the negative comments have also been really helpful.
Great. So now on to Hannah. So to provide value to non-paying users, your team at Blinkist created a curated experience called the Free Daily. So tell us how this free experience actually led to changes to your premium offering.
Yes, so hello, my name is Hannah. I work with Blinkist. For those of you that do not know, we take the key insights of nonfiction books and condense it in 15 minutes. So hopefully it will be your destination for the lifelong learner. So one of the things that we did is that we changed our free experience. And then what we did is that we introduced something that we call the free daily. So we just selected one of our booking blinks, and then as a free customer, that's what you got access to. And then what happened is that when these customers will convert and become paid customers, they will be like, where is my free daily? Like, I cannot find like the same experience that I had when I had my when I was a free user. So what this showed us is that customers, first of all, definitely want consistency, right? So they expect their paid experience to be the free plus plus. And in our case, they show up to the paid, and it was just the plus plus. So where was the free? So it was confusing. So that consistency was very important. A very interesting discovery for us is that we realized that recommendations was actually a feature for our customers. Our customers wanted to be recommended. And then limiting the number of options and kind of like really help focus the experience for them was very important. So we have done a lot of changes since then to go in this direction. And then the other thing is that we tend to always think that the paid experience is the one that will influence the free one, but sometimes there can be a lot of learnings on your free experience that can actually influence your paid experience. So just don't dismiss one because it's free. And then, the other thing that I wanted to show is something very interesting that we have with a paywall in the German market. So we offer our content in both English and German. And then around a year and a half ago, we moved from a 24-hour trial to a 7-day trial. And then this thing was like amazing, like our conversion rates, everybody was super happy, 60%, we did it, and then we look into our ratings, and we got murdered in the German market. Customers were very, very, very dissatisfied with it. And of course, the marketing team is like, stop that thing, people are not going to install the app, so we have to kind of like revert it. And then when we realized what was happening is that in Germany, there is a lot of resistance towards subscription models. And one of the things that we did in this change is that we also took away like tier subscriptions, and we took away the monthly to only be annual. So we created a lot of resistance to the German customers that were already suspicious of subscriptions. So what we learned is that localization is super important. So we have one team that is just in charge of the German market, understanding what they want, what they like, what they don't like, and how they want to be talked. And the other thing is that you can try again later. So we tried the same test a year later, and the results were the same in conversions and in lifetime value, but this time customers were actually happy about it, and then we actually got like good reviews. So this definitely helped us in being more transparent and being more focused in the market that we want to influence.
Yeah. And speaking of localizing your subscription, the next session led by my colleague Sam will actually be about how to localize pricing to different users around the world. So I think that's a good segue for that. OK, so lastly, let's hear from Patricia from the New York Times, who's going to share how they have been strategically thinking about tiering their user base. So not just free users versus subscribers, but also this idea of anonymous versus registered users as well. So can you tell us a bit more about your thinking there?
Yeah, so I'm Patricia. I'm a product manager. I lead subscription growth for users of our core New York Times app. At the Times, we believe that the best way to engage with our journalism is as a logged-in user, either on our site or within the apps. For this test specifically that I call out, we experienced with introducing a hard registration wall that gated access to our app on the first use experience. This was exposed to a very limited subset of the audience with the hypothesis that an increase in registrations would provide more business benefit than any potential downstream negative impact on engagement. In terms of the actual visual approach of the test, you can see in the first 3 screenshots, it was largely the same between the control and the hard registration wall variant. So it featured a full screen photograph of our journalists on the field alongside some copy that talked generally about the New York Times. That final screen illustrated a prompt for the user to either create an account with additional CTAs to log in or subscribe. The key difference there between the control variant and our hard registration wall was that part on the bottom that says continue to top stories. So in the control variant, we had that line of copy that is right at the really bottom of the screen compared to our hard registration wall, where the only change that we made was removing that line. So that meant that for users in the hard registration wall variant, you either had to create an account, log in, or subscribe in order to access our app at all. And what we found was that for that variant, registration rate was up. However, we saw significant declines in both subscription conversion rate as well as bounce rate, which we define as the incremental percentage of users who did not come back for a second session after initially seeing the hard registration wall. Our biggest takeaway from this wasn't necessarily that a hard registration wall gating access to our app wasn't the way to go, but rather we needed to be much, much, much more thoughtful about the design and execution of this test. So simply removing that line of copy didn't illustrate to the user enough what exactly they were getting with creating an account or logging in, nor did we differentiate that a registration is distinct from both anonymous state as well as subscription. So taking those findings and those problems, we approached a second test, which was an iteration of this, which was essentially taking the control variant that did allow a user to continue in the anonymous state, but introducing several different changes. So first, we introduced a visual change. So rather than that full-screen photo-heavy approach of 3 screens that led to a create account page, we instead went with a more minimalist black and white theme while still pulling in those photographs of our journalists into a separate subscription step. We also provided a lot more context into what exactly our users were seeing in those photographs. So we included the names of the journalists, where they were on assignment, and what exactly they were covering, which was something distinct that we hadn't included previously. In addition, we thought that the number of CTAs on that create account page were just too many. We were asking the user to create account, log in, subscribe, or continue, which is a lot and really heavy mental load for a user to process in that moment. So we separated out a registration and login step distinct from a subscription step. So in that second screen there are a couple things we wanted to address. The primary one is that through user testing, we found that a lot of users didn't actually understand the difference between registering and subscribing. They often conflated the two, or they didn't understand that subscribing didn't mean that you were registering, or that there was a difference between an anonymous state and a registered state. So something that we were pushing really hard to try to have the user understand. We worked through that in the copy. So in the first line, we highlight that with an account, you get more access to articles as opposed to what you would get if you were an anonymous user. We also call out that you have the ability to engage more deeply with our journalists and our content by engaging in conversations, commenting, and really talking to other members of the New York Times community. Lastly, on that registration screen on the CTA, we call out that an account is free. We really wanted to drive home the idea that a registration was not you committing with a credit card to a subscription. The last change that we made here in this test was on that final screen. So by breaking out that separate subscription step, we had a lot more ability to really highlight mission-driven messaging tied to our subscription. And this was the first time that we had ever done this sort of thing within the app. And we call out specifically how a subscription helps to benefit our business and our journalists and what it helps to enable. Across the board, we saw increases in all of our key metrics, so in registrations, in logins, as well as in conversions. And the hypothesis originally was that we were hoping to increase registrations and logins while maintaining consistent conversion. So seeing that increase was actually really exciting for us. And one of the immediate questions we had when we saw the increase in conversion rate was, are we merely pulling forward the demand of users who would have eventually subscribed, or are we actually getting new users who wouldn't have otherwise subscribed? So seeing that we saw lifts in both the day 1 conversion rate and the 30-day conversion rate was really encouraging to us. And coming out of this, we're looking to see how else can we apply these findings and where else can we find problems to address.
And so for future experiments, will you be prioritizing trying to drive that registration or ultimately driving that subscription? Do you feel like the two can go hand in hand, or you have to choose one or the other?
That's a really good question. So obviously both. So the ultimate metric that we're trying to drive is subscriptions. However, we do believe that as a logged in and registered user, you have a deeper experience and direct relationship with the Times that you wouldn't have otherwise. So by creating an account within the app, you have access to a new feature we rolled out called For You, where you have the ability to follow specific topics. And we're actually currently testing a newsletter that sends an email daily around those topics rather than specific editorially curated, like morning briefing newsletters. So we see registration as a step to conversion, with the ultimate goal being conversion in terms of subscriptions.
Great. And so before we move on to audience Q&A, for the panelists here, do you have like one piece of advice that you'd want to give to people in the room around crafting both that free experience and the paid experience? Is there like a one-liner that you'd like to finish with?
I would say the key part really is just A/B testing, just
Yep.
making sure that it's really hard to kind of theorize about what would be the right balance between the free and paid experiences, the only way really to know is to look at your previous A/B tests, see if there are any hints of which direction to go. Is it more free content, less? Make sure that you keep an eye on your ratings, on your engagement and retention. It's not all about conversion, especially if you're a business that relies a lot on organic installs, because word of mouth could be affected if you have lower ratings, if people are not really happy about your user experience. But at the end of the day, the only way you can really tell is by trying things.
Great.
Yeah, I'd say have a point of view on what the magic moment is in the free experience. And if you're able to give that to users before they hit a paywall, they're more likely to be engaged and people that love your product.
I will add to that if you're not sure kind of like what it is, for us as a startup, like it was kind of like hard to understand kind of like what that moment was. So it's to be bold also when you're trying with the free and not just try to optimize little things, but not like be bold, really try different things to kind of like see what it works, and just don't forget to listen to our customers, because that's where you're going to get like all the feedback that you need.
Yeah, and what I say, I think it's like a combination of what all you guys have said. Essentially, that it's important to remember that, at least for the Times, there are people who will subscribe instantly, who are very high intent, and then there are users who really need to be habituated with the product, and to always remember that there are distinct audiences that we should be addressing.